Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, hazardous weather graphic. Winter storm warnings continue tonight, tomorrow, and until, I believe, 9 p.m. Thursday evening for the Upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country there on up to Eagle and a little to the north, as well as mostly areas east of greater Fairbanks area and also to the south to about the Alaska Range there. And that's looking for 6 to 10 inches of snow to fall total in those areas, again through 9 p.m. Thursday evening. And then for the Fairbanks area over toward Tanana and the remainder of the Alaska Range, it's a winter weather advisory out, again, for moderate amounts of snow as opposed to the heavy snow in the warning area. 4 to 7 inches expected in the advisory areas, and those advisories also out until 9 p.m. Thursday. And then over the northern panhandle, Klondike, Haines Highway areas, that's a winter weather advisory that kicks into effect about midnight tonight, and looking for several inches of snow to fall tonight into tomorrow. And then down mainly, it's the one to the south there, that's for Hyder, and looking for snow there, winter weather advisory for snow there, looking for 5 to 8 inches to fall tonight. That winter weather advisory ends at 6 a.m. Thursday, and again, that's over toward the Misty Fjords, Hyder, Stewart area, again 5 to 8 inches tonight. Otherwise, moving on to satellite imagery, you can see the mass of clouds associated with low pressure there in the northern Gulf of Alaska that brought the 10 to 18 inches of snow to northern Cook Inlet, Manauskas-Susitna Valley, there, Eagle River, on up into Palmer. And that's shifting east-northeastward, and the amounts are lightening up now from the heavier snowfall that was seen back down toward South Central Alaska, northern Cook Inlet, northern Kenai Peninsula overnight last night, and into early this morning with areas of snow, Copper River Basin, now north of the Alaska Range, several inches falling Delta Junction up toward Fairbanks, Nenana, and those areas. That'll pick up again tonight, again in the warning area there. And then the front extending down, a couple of low centers. You can see one there south of Middleton Island, and another one down by the Queen Charlottes. That one mostly pushing eastward, but the frontal boundary extending just off the southeast coast there. That brought some gusty winds and moderate amounts of rain to the panhandle. And then a break over the northern Bering Sea, western part of the state, much drier conditions there. And the next system stands out quite vividly there, pushing into the central Aleutians there with the low center back west of Adak or back towards Shimya, and warm front pushing some clouds, maybe some light moisture into Unimak Island. But it looks like some sunshine broke out over Unalaska Island today, the Pribilofs, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, and areas of the southwest coast, a little bit there. Kodiak Island going clear, northwest winds gusting to about 45 miles an hour there. Even windier conditions with some areas of blowing snow over the Kenai Peninsula, maybe areas of Turnagain Arm into Passage Canal. Looking at winds gusted to 50 miles an hour this afternoon at Seward, and even stronger Pilot Rock had a gust to 60 miles an hour. And currently, winds gusting to about 45 miles an hour at Passage Canal. And again, Kodiak with clearing skies, clear skies, temperatures or winds gusting to 45 miles an hour, pulling the colder air in. They're about 34 degrees currently. Otherwise, that front along the southeast coast, they also had some pretty gusty winds there. Heidelberg had a peak wind gust of around 60 miles an hour. Cape Decision about 50 miles an hour. And let's see, rainfall amounts down that way, anywhere from 7/10 of an inch up at Haines to about 6/10 of an inch down at Heidelberg, and Yakutat had the heaviest precipitation amount in the state with about 1 inch falling in the last 12 hours today. Otherwise, 7 inches or anywhere 2 to 4 inches or more there in the greater Nome area with that upper trough or weak trough there, bringing some snow in across the southern Seward Peninsula area, but about 2 to 4 inches, lighter amounts elsewhere. There, not much in the Kuskokwim Delta or Yukon Delta areas there, just some areas of light snow, and snow diminishing over the western Alaska ranges. It kind of tends to increase there over the Copper River Basin into the upper Tanana Valley. And up along, or for the forecast for tonight, that next system, low center, moves right up between Adak and Atka by 3 a.m. Thursday morning, with warm front spreading rain and snow, trending toward rain for the eastern Aleutians, and that possibly spreading into the western Alaska Peninsula, but staying south of the Pribilof Islands there. Gusty north winds, rain for the western Aleutians, again diminishing out toward Chimianatu. High pressure building in along the southwest coast for variably to mostly cloudy skies, maybe a little more in the way of clearing over Bristol Bay. It'll be mostly clear over Kodiak Island with continued gusty northwest winds, but just a chance of some snow showers there, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, that weak trough extending down from the Chukchi Sea there. And also for the Arctic coast, could see a few flurries, maybe some fog, but nothing significant. But look for periods of snow, Copper River Basin up into the eastern interior. Rain and snow continues over the Panhandle. That front trying to push slowly eastward. And then tomorrow, that front by the afternoon pretty much washed out or pushed into Canada, and looking at the low pressure remaining or tracking eastward to just off the central coast. So it'll stay pretty unsettled over all of the southeast coast with the heaviest precipitation in the form of rain near sea level, snow at the higher elevations, especially in the north there, and upper level trough also at the surface, both at the surface and aloft, keeping periods of snow in the Copper River Basin beginning to diminish there over the upper Tanana Valley area, and just some light snow showers right along the central western Alaska range areas. Mostly clear for Bristol Bay, Togiak Bay, and another weak system brings a chance of light snow to the central western Arctic coast down into the Shishmaref area, Kivalina, Point Hope, maybe a few flurries at Kotzebue, but again, pretty light amounts there. And that system dives off to the east-southeast, just grazing the Alaska Peninsula with some light rain or snow. Winds swing around to the northeast there, and that starts to drop the snow levels down for the eastern Aleutians, but areas of light rain continuing for Adak and Atka. Next week front brings some more rain into the western Aleutian areas. Otherwise, high pressure makes for light winds, but mostly cloudy skies for the eastern Bering Sea on up in across St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, the Seward Peninsula. Basically dry and mostly cloudy over areas north of the Alaska Range of the eastern Arctic coast. And for the day on Friday, stronger high pressure and over the interior, low pressure off the southern panhandle, the gradient tightest right across south central Alaska, the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Basin, so gusty winds, maybe some areas of blowing snow, and clearing skies, colder temperatures as some modified Arctic air gets in across all areas of south central Alaska. Winds start to diminish there for Kodiak Island, and still some areas of light snow and fog there for the eastern North Gulf Coast, up across eastern Copper River Basin, Wrangell, St. Elias Mountains, into the eastern Alaska Range, maybe Northway and Tok, but those amounts will be light. And still a weak trough up over eastern Norton Sound, Nulato Hills there, Norton Bay, up into Kotzebue Sound along the northwest coast. Chance of snow showers with that feature as it slowly kind of wiggles and works its way northeastward there over the top of that interior ridge, and some flurries for the central Arctic coast. And again, rain and snow continues over areas of the Panhandle, or snow showers. Be intermittent, but look for cloudy skies, little in the way of any clearing there. And the next big system pulling into the Bering Sea, southwest Bering, the low center in the front, spreading gale force winds, rain and snow, Pribilofs, maybe rain and snow trending toward rain for the eastern Aleutians, just plain rain for the remainder of the Aleutian chain, again mixing back with snow towards Chimianatu. And for temperatures, for tonight, lows 30s for the Panhandle, teens interior areas of Alaska to lower 20s down toward the coast, mid-20s Kodiak. Highs tomorrow in the mid to upper 30s for the Panhandle, and about teens for the Copper River Basin, upper teens for the Susitna Valley, but Kenai looking at about a high of 13, so 15 to 25 actually across south central Alaska for those highs tomorrow, and near freezing for Kodiak with the gusty northwest winds, colder temperatures, but clear skies there, upper teens to near 20 for the highs for the Bristol Bay area. And then for Friday morning lows, we'll be looking at temperatures in the lower 20s there, up around Haines to Skagway, mid-20s around Juneau, lower 30s along the central and south coastal areas in toward Annette Island, Metlakatla, otherwise mid to upper 20s, and lower to 20s for the Yakutat area, mid-20s for the Valdez area, but a little below zero there in the areas of the Copper River Basin. Colder south central Alaska with those winds. Wind chills definitely below zero anywhere the wind's blowing. Mid-teens for Homer for the lows. Seldovia lower 20s for Kodiak Island. And looks like lows right around zero for the Kuskokwim Valley and 0 to 10 for your lows there in Bristol Bay. And about 3 there for Talkeetna, lower 20s, Kodiak Island. Highs in the mid-20s for Kodiak and lower to mid-teens for Bristol Bay for the highs on Friday afternoon. Staying below 10 in the Copper River Basin. Highs lower around 10 to 15 for South Central Alaska, closer to 20 for Seward and Homer, Seldovia, and Yakutat, upper 20s, mid-20s for the areas from for Lynn Canal there to Haines, Skagway, lower 30s for Juneau, upper 30s, Southern Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Thursday morning's flying weather graphic showing a pretty good zone of IFR there from the Central Brooks Range, covering right through the mid and upper Yukon River Valley to the flats, and then southward, central interior, Copper River Basin, over to the border, and down into Talkeetna's and the Turnagain Arm area, northern Kenai Peninsula, and another area extending down to the eastern North Gulf Coast, covering all of the Panhandle, improving back to the west with mostly marginal VFR over the western interior out to the northern Bering Sea, and for the central and western Aleutians, and a pretty good area of VFR for the Pribilofs. Excuse me. Eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Fognak Island, marginal VFR up into southern Cook Inlet. And then for the afternoon time, we're looking at continued IFR over the eastern interior, all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast, southward there into the Copper River Basin, possibly as far south as Valdez, and possibly as far west as Eureka and Tanita, maybe, possibly even Palmer, but becoming VFR for Cook Inlet, and that'll extend down into southern Cook Inlet and the Kamishak Bay area, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island. Marginal VFR, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, up the eastern Bering Sea there to the northwest coast. Panhandle seeing some improvement along with the North Gulf Coast becoming more marginal VFR than IFR. And for the Friday morning outlook, IFR pushing back into the western Aleutians and almost to Adak. Marginal VFR, southern Bering Sea, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Pribilofs VFR. IFR from Nunivak Island northward to the Bering Strait, including St. Lawrence Island, western central Arctic coast IFR, northeast interior IFR. Southern Alaska, not too bad. Areas of marginal VFR, Prince William Sound, and on up to the Alaska Range there, but mostly VFR to the west and east of that zone. Panhandle, solid VFR. That becomes marginal Friday afternoon for the southeast coast. Most of interior Alaska, it will be marginal VFR, but mostly VFR there for the Susitna, Matanuska Valley, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula. Some IFR along the southwest coast pushing inland across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Another band of IFR there from Atka Island eastward to Unmak Island. And for the passes, Anatuvik, pretty good improvement. IFR to start, VFR to finish. Adigan showing improvement throughout the day, but not quite to the VFR category that Anatuvik will have. Go marginal there for the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR throughout the day. Thursday, rainy, marginal. Windy, IFR, trending toward marginal VFR toward early afternoon. Isabel, IFR the entire day. Mentasta, IFR at times throughout the day Thursday. And Tanita, slow improvement, IFR becoming marginal VFR in the mid to latter part of the afternoon. Portage, same trend, IFR to marginal VFR. And Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels at the surface there, just south of St. Matthew Island and off the southwest coast, right across Kodiak Island and just south of the North Gulf Coast, cutting across the Panhandle. And then a little more thermal gradient out there over the central Aleutians, 2,000 to 6,000 feet there. And as we'll see, that's where the strongest jet stream wind speeds are along that area where the thermal gradient is the tightest. Otherwise, in the meantime, looking at icing, we've got areas of isolated moderate icing there across the eastern interior, about 2,000 to 10,000 feet or so, and that extends down over the panhandle. It'll be a little more extensive down in that area from the eastern interior, actually, eastern Copper River Basin, and also another area of possible semi-significant icing there for the Alaska Peninsula, Pribilofs to the eastern Aleutians. And the 33,000-foot wind flow chart, as you can see, the strongest wind max there, right along that area of tight packing of the freezing level lines, 155 knots there right across the central Aleutians. Another increased wind zone there from the Yukon Delta down across Kodiak, 65 to 70 knots. 9,000 feet, high pressure near St. Matthew Island. Northwest winds coming around that center through the Bering Strait at about 40 knots. Otherwise, southwest 40 into the southeast coast. 3,000-foot winds, 35 knots out of the east, north of the eastern Aleutians. Turbulence, moderate chop, Alaska Peninsula to Amchitka. Most of Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, up into south central Alaska.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy in these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and, of course, with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point, years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the Northern Lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the Northern Lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling. You know, it's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business. But if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you're going to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, you're elevated, levitating, you are lifted up, your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything. So you got to remember that luck is kind of a relative term. But I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Moving on to the marine forecast. Have that front edging into the southeast coast, and in advance of the front, winds will be on the light side from the southeast at about 15 knots, except north 15 there in Lynn Canal. Then behind the front, west winds 20 to 25 knots, strongest on the south coast, and the extreme north coast, east-northeast 15 to 20 knots. And for the day Friday, let's see, there we go. North winds 30 knots, Lynn Canal, northern inner channels, and small craft advisories for Stevens Passage, northeast at 25 knots, southeast 20 for Clarence Strait. And on the south coast, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, and the north coast, east winds at 25 knots. Prince William Sound for Thursday, northwest winds 30 knots, seas at about 6 feet. Small craft advisories for the eastern North Gulf Coast, north winds at 25. Gale warnings for the western North Gulf Coast, northwest winds 35 knots, and even stronger gales in the forecast for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, northwest winds 45 knots. Small craft advisories for Cook Inlet, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for Friday, lighter winds for Cook Inlet, north to northeast, 10 to 15 knots, seas down to 2 to 4 feet. Kamishak Bay, northwest winds diminishing to 30 knots, and gales continue for the Barren Islands out of the northwest, 35 knots, north to northwest winds 20 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, winds will be northeast at about 15 knots. Kodiak Island, pretty brisk west winds tomorrow, or northwest winds, west-northwest 30 to 45 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula, east-northeast winds 25 knots, northwest at 20 for Bristol Bay. Moving on to Friday, Kodiak Island area, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, seas as high as 10 feet. In Bristol Bay, winds will be northeast at 20, and 30-knot winds from the east and northeast are forecast for the Alaska Peninsula, seas right around 8 feet. For, let's see, Unalaska Island on Thursday, east winds 25 to 30 knots. Unimak Island, kind of variable there on the Pacific side of the island, southwest 25, east 25 on the Bering Sea side. Same thing for the central Aleutians on the Pacific side of Adak and Atka, west at 25, Bering Sea side, northeast 25. And then for the western Aleutians, small craft advisories, northwest to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. For Friday, Kiska to Shimei, north winds at 25 knots. On Chitka Island, Adak and Atka, south winds 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians, southeast winds 30 to 35 knots with seas 10 to 12 feet. For the southwest coast, variable to north winds 10 to 15 knots. And for St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, northwest at 15, southwest 15, St. Matthew Island, east at 20 for the Pribilofs. Big increase in the winds here. Most areas, especially for the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island, gale warnings there. Southeast 40 knots, southeast 35, St. Matthew Island. And the Kuskokwim Delta coast, south of Nunivak Island, east winds at 35 knots, south 35 knots on the Yukon Delta coast, southwest 25 for St. Lawrence Island. Central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast for Thursday, winds east 15 knots, seas and ice-free waters at 3 feet, southwest 15 for the western Arctic coast, and for the Chukchi Sea, winds will be west at 20 knots. For Friday, Chukchi Sea, south to southwest winds 25 knots, western Arctic coast about 20 knots out of the west, central coast small craft advisories, west winds 25 knots, and then 20 knot winds from the west and southwest for the areas for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And for tonight, that front pushing slowly into the Panhandle, and so periods of rain and snow, changing to mostly snow there for the Klondike Highway and Haines after midnight, or at midnight until tomorrow, through tomorrow morning, where there's several inches expected. And snow continues over the Copper River Basin, especially this evening, north of the Alaska Range, upper Tanana Valley areas, 40-mile country, beginning to taper off along the Alaska Range. Next system bringing rain and snow and rain into the Aleutians. And for Thursday, drier conditions over the interior, lingering snow, Copper River Basin area to the Alaska Range, rain and snow for the Panhandle. Outlook for Friday, next big storm brings gale force winds and rain, or rain and snow, mostly rain for the Aleutians, rain and snow for the Pribilofs, and stays unsettled, damp and cloudy with snow at the higher elevations of the southeast coast, clear and colder and windier south central Alaska, North Gulf Coast, with light winds up over the interior areas with a chance of some snow showers along the northwest coast down in toward eastern Norton Sound.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.